Hey everyone, and welcome to this next chapter of the Company Road podcast. We just went live with episode 40 and things are going really well, so I can't really thank you enough for your continued engagement with the show. And you, the listeners, are what it's all about, so you've encouraged me to carry on doing this, despite the fact that it takes quite a lot of time and effort together. But thank you very much for the feedback that I've had so far, and we'll keep going as long as you're happy to consume the content. So thanks so much. And if you've got questions or specific things you'd like me to cover on the show, then feel free to email me at chris@companyroad.co. But running this is also been a huge lesson in adaptation. So I'm always having moments where I'm analyzing myself in a lot of detail. Obviously, when you hear yourself back, it's quite confronting. I think about the listeners to the show as well all the time and what they want, what you would want, and what value I can provide or we can provide as a community of innovators, really, in some way or another. In a way, it's a process of innovation in itself where we're always thinking about the hundreds of things that we could do. You think a little bit more precisely about the problem that you're having to solve, and then you're thinking about what experiments you can run to see what sticks. And much of what you do in innovation when you consult or when you're running your own practice is similar to that. So our next big topic is around innovation and its formula for success. And I can't really think of anyone better to shine a light on this topic than the one and only Head of Innovation Service Design at Kmart Australia and New Zealand, Fabio Oliveira. So Fabio, massive welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. So Fabio, you've done some lecturing as well in the past, but you're a long-standing innovation leader and practitioner in both retail space. You've done some work in government and a few other places in between. And your day-to-day is innovation. So every day must be seriously challenging in one way or another and different from one day to the next, I'm sure. Innovation is hugely challenging in its nature, and the world of work is obviously shifting all the time. So maybe I'll start with just asking, what do you see as being the things that innovation teams are struggling with today? And how has that changed in your view?
The struggles of today, very similar to the struggles from maybe I'd say 10, 15 years ago when I first started, which is really truly understanding what innovation can do in a large corporation environment, which is in many ways very different from what you hear in terms of innovation in startups or any other space. And for me, the key challenge has always been proving value and being adequate to the context that you are innovating. And I talk to a lot of people that are working in innovation at the moment, and it's interesting that there has never been a bigger appetite to do innovation, but not with the term innovation. So there's a lot of investment in technology, a lot of partnerships, open innovation, working with startups, but companies are not talking about it.
So it's almost like the word is not resonating like it used to, or maybe it was never the right word to begin with. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it became quite, I'd say, exposed a few years ago. It became almost this thing like, if it's not magic, then it doesn't work. There's a lot of work that goes behind it to make innovation work. And I think in some ways, people end up burning the concept a little bit.
You're right. The expectation is also very high. So attached with that word is usually an expectation, and that can be absolutely incredibly high in terms of how the bar is set. What are you seeing as some of the workarounds for that in one way or another?
I think that it starts with being deeply connected to the organization. And what I mean by being connected is not necessarily being embedded in the business. I think that damages the practice of innovation, but understanding the strategic direction the company is going, what are the strategic projects that need help, what are the challenges that your market is facing, what's happening culturally in the organization. I think that's the starting point. If you're not connected and you don't know what are you trying to innovate, what are you trying to transform, whatever the name people want to give, then it gets really hard to deliver anything meaningful.
I think that the simplicity of the challenge is almost a driver in one way or another. So if it's very easy to understand, what the problem space is, then obviously the result and solution from that can be simpler, and it can be simpler to communicate and get people behind as well a little bit. But when it becomes a little bit more complex and you're looking to more adaptive challenges where you're having to navigate a complex landscape, is that the world that you sit in, or do you feel that it's usually fairly straightforward?
Definitely. I think that's the reality of business is quite complex, and it's easy when you look from the outside. Like I've been in retail for quite a few years now, and you look from the outside and you see those amazing technologies that are always in the media, Amazon, just walk out technology. But yeah, and you say, well, I want to do that. But in my case, work at Kmart, which is a low-cost organization, we actually want to have a different challenge. Our challenge is to make sure that the business stays productive so we can continue to reduce prices. So that's amazing technology, but that's not truly what do we need right now? The investment on something like that would be huge. And you can spend years and years innovating on all the areas of the business that might not be seen as sexy as the heavy technology, computer vision, or whatever, until it matures. And then when it matures, it can actually go in and do it. But chasing those complex projects that are not so sexy, but are actually meaningful.
So what's sexy and what's not, just so that we're clear?
I think a lot of those emerging technologies before it is mature enough. And it's definitely the sexy part. Everyone wants to work with those things. I remember the first time that I heard of Amazon was back in 2015, 16, that they were doing those things, and the technology is still not ready. But what's not sexy is working sometimes in operations and making sure that you're delivering value to the customer by changing how your supply chain works or your store operations work. That's the kind of stuff that people are sometimes not willing to do, but where the value actually sits in. And it's where the biggest opportunities for innovations are. Back when I was in government a few years ago, it was the same thing. And especially in government, you have the political element, which adds a whole different range of problems. But the problem is usually where people are not willing to go to. It's things that have been overlooked for many years, and you have to spend some time there and investigate.
Yeah, those ones are interesting, aren't they? Where you realize, or you come across a problem that somebody's or a team have been attempting to solve for quite a while, or you're into that space where you're defining the problem and people are finding that that ground is really familiar. And they're thinking, okay, we tried this and that 2-3 years ago, 5 years ago, this and that. People have got a memory for that. But obviously when you come to revisit the problem, you're thinking, how do we get past it and actually solve for it? So what are you finding is working in that space?
I think being honest with data and the loud voices in large organizations are very strong. And of course, if there is a priority, you're going to follow that priority. But when you start investigating, trying to understand what's the real problem behind the problem that was given to you, you have to rely on the data. I remember there was a story that came out right when I started back in 2013. My boss at the time said, look, we got to find a way to make stores more productive. We are seeing a decline in productivity. And I came in, started looking at what was happening in stores. And I went back to him and I said, the problem is organizing replenishment inside the store. And said, no, that's not possible because we have just finished the project doing this. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. Because that project opened the door for a lot of things that we can do now. And that end up being where we spend the next few years working with a huge opportunity. But if I had said, oh, no, okay, if we've done that something before, let's not do it. Data is always ahead.
Yeah, for sure. And that concept of where do you start, particularly when there's a big problem to solve, it's often, okay, how do I get to an outcome quickly? And it starts to excite people. And I think a lot of people would obviously think of the huge mountain that's in front of them and the ultimate goal in trying to either sell in an innovation challenge or to solve for that in some sort of way. But often, like you were saying, it's actually quite a lot easier, but also just much more effective when there's a short-term result and you can just get behind it and people can see that it's actually working. And it, you know, the runway for innovation is then set a little bit more clearly. Have you found that that's then been the starting point? And what have you used typically to keep momentum up through innovation programs?
I think what you said there is one of my fundamental beliefs, and something that I try to do every time that I started in a new company is to find results quickly, even if it's not the biggest opportunity that you might have identified. It's really important to build that cover. And when I say that cover, it's just the respect that you're actually doing work that is going to deliver results. Because I think the concern when you establish an innovation practice is like, I'm investing a lot of money on this because you can't do that with one person. So any company that is trying to do that with one person, it's probably not going to get there. But if you're serious about it, you're investing. The question will come on day 2. So what have you done? So you got to find something that will create that protection. And that protection will say, all right, I trust that they actually understand the business. They are delivering something. Now let's go and build the next portfolio. That might not be that big thing that requires large investment, but you're going step by step so you can continue to survive on your journey. The first stage is survive. If you survive as a team, then you can start planning, okay, let's get bigger on this. Let's have a bigger scale impact.
Because the other way around, and I just want to ask you this because it can happen this way where you're pretty much given the autonomy and there's not really that sense of, I guess, collaboration or alignment or agreement on the thing that you're delivering, but they love the end goal and they love the fact that you're talking about all these experiments that are running and everything else. But I've seen it where you're pretty much left alone and then you come to do a bit of a reveal at some point later in the process. And it's like, oh, what's happened here? It's not aligned. And then obviously things get pulled. But have you been in that situation as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think to work in innovation, you have to be very passionate, sometimes idealistic about what you're doing. It's very easy to lose perspective of that context that I was talking about. And it definitely happened to me. It happened to me. I came out when I had first started. We chose that replenishment path, and I got back with the first project was something that I really thought it was the right solution. And knowing all the theory, I got probably too excited with falling in love with the idea, came back with something that was completely wrong to what the business expected. And I had at that time, I was on a work visa. So I had 12 months. And if I didn't make it, I was probably going to have to go back to Brazil, where I'm originally from. And I didn't want that to happen. So I changed direction pretty quickly. But it's so easy to happen. And it happens all the time.
So what are you looking out for during that process as, I guess, markers of success, or like what's giving you confidence through that process? And what are you spotting out there in the culture of your working environment?
In our teams, I think we always try to look for excitement. We work a lot with store teams. If the store teams are not excited, there's either a product problem or a change problem. And usually a change problem is a design problem. So we try to look for that excitement. Do they see value in it? Because they're ultimately your customer. If they don't see value, then there is no value. And a very short path to value. So if you're introducing something, let's say to store operations, you have to capture results on your first, second, maximum third iteration. If you're not capturing results, there's again, go back to the drawing board. Might be a problem definition issue or might be a solution issue. But those very early results are so important because you have to keep stacking wins. Otherwise, it's hard to progress.
Even on the innovation challenges that you think are probably on the less sexy side, as you were saying, actually can create a number of different reactions, right? People find that the most basic stuff, if it's solved for, is transformative in their organizations. That can be incredibly powerful too, right?
And it usually is. I believe that most of the large organizations have a lot of low-hanging fruits that are opportunity for innovation. You don't need to go all out. You can go. But if you want to deliver results quickly, there is a lot of low-hanging fruits that you can capture and improve using different methodologies to deliver those results quickly. And those are the ones that I usually try to go after in whatever problem space that we are working. Is like, what are the low-hanging fruits? What are the things that no one has touched? But if we do it, it will be quite simple to execute and just requires us being a bit courageous in the beginning to touch that area that no one touched in a long time.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I think metrics come into it, obviously, in terms of how you present the result. But what from your repertoire have you found works really well from a metrics and reporting point of view?
It is a lot easier when you are operating and trying to innovate in an environment where you have a lot of metrics already. We have the luxury, say in retail, to be able to test something and get feedback in a matter of minutes and times hours. So you can actually have multiple iterations of products in a week. In government, you have a lot of metrics, but you can't influence them sometimes for months. And you operate on lag indicators, or sometimes not even that, sometimes just qualitative feedback on something that you're designing, hoping that you're going to get some feedback. So we try to be, especially in retail, very strong with metrics. We select the KPIs that we're going to impact before we track them because the numbers don't lie. People might love it, but if you're not moving the dial, then you're never going to get a business case signed off. And I think keeping the metric front of mind is really important to keep you honest.
It wasn't always that way, was it? Because behavioral data, anything beyond basic demographics at one point just wasn't there. And then all of a sudden through digital channels and like you were saying, matter of hours, you collect data that can give you more of a direction, and that level of granularity then informs the next round of work. So have you found it easy enough to adapt to some of those changes and to work with, ever increasing and more complex data sets?
Oh, it's beautiful now. The amount of data that we have in retail now compared to 10 years ago when I started is so different. At Kmart, we have implemented RFID, which is the radio frequency tags that can be read every night by a robot. So every night, for example, we know exactly how many items we have of a specific key code that's working apparel at the moment. But imagine every night exactly how many items you have, where they are, so you can trigger replenishment, for example, and that's just the beginning of it. I think this is another thing that back in the day, 10 years ago, everyone's like, let's invest on this, but it wasn't ready. And now it is. It's the convergence of multiple technologies that generate that platform, that data platform that never existed. And you can build a lot of products on top of that platform, which is super exciting.
Yeah, that is great. I mean, there's always like questions that people have, right? One of the questions I have is around, I guess, the things that you put in your basket that you pick up from the shelf, but then at some point later in the shop, you feel like, oh, no, I can't buy that. You put it back somewhere. So maybe through your RFID, you can see where it lands in the shop and whether it's near the till or whether it's not. But it's always interesting to see how products potentially move within the store.
Yeah, you can do all of that. Like you have a map updated every day with location, quantity, and location and an XYZ coordinate. Like imagine that. It's just, it's so futuristic, but it's available.
So that must be helpful. If you're evidencing, obviously back to innovation, you're evidencing things, the fact they're working, that feels like it's a little bit simpler. Some people have a bit of a discussion within enterprise level innovation around who should be running it. Is it a core team? Is it an organic thing that happens in a certain way? Is it defined by certain rituals? Have you found there's a formula in any of those areas that seems to be working?
I think it's hard to say a formula, but I have a preference. And my preference is for a dedicated innovation team. I remember when I was interviewing for WorkSafe, government organization, had a huge transformation agenda. And we're talking about exactly that question, like when should innovation be decentralized? And I said, look, I've never seen it happening in a way that is successful. And I think the reason is that the BAU, as we like to say, the core business is too strong. You have to protect your business model, and asking people to leave that behind and innovate and sometimes challenge their own ways of doing things. The chance of that happening is very small. You can talk about the exceptions, Google or Netflix or one of those companies. Yeah, they can do it, but a large organization, I think, requires someone that is going to be pushing the agenda forward. Not that innovation doesn't happen everywhere, it happens, but it's also killed very fast. Like we have 45,000 team members in our stores. How many great ideas come up every day and how many ideas doesn't get to us? Some do, and we try to facilitate a channel for that to happen, but most ideas probably die without even connecting to the next person. So it's a lost potential. If you don't have a team that is actually, that's their sole mission is to improve the business with exponential results, it's hard for that to happen.
Corporately, there are various systems that come into play, sometimes that are trying to gather those ideas and basically bring them into one central view. Have you seen anything like that work?
In some ways, yes, but not as a indiscriminate practice. We have tested this in the past. It came out, we got to a point where we had thousands of ideas and we just didn't know what to do with those. The recent attempt, which is being pretty successful, we are targeting a small number of stores that we know relatively open and they always keep pushing ideas. So we work, let's say, with 10 stores at a time all around the country in New Zealand, and they will work with us to suggest ideas in a specific topic. And then once that's done, we move to the next group of stores. And we actually got some really amazing ideas coming from those champions, let's call it. And that doesn't overwhelm my team to analyze answer back to the team members, but you get some high quality things because the people are motivated because they can see what's happening with those ideas.
Yeah, nice. There's certain people that are on side in a way. They're almost like your allies or your silent innovation workforce. You're always thinking of things and they come up with improvements, and that's really great. How do you spot those people? What characterizes them? Just for other people that listen to the show, they might be thinking, who can I lean on to help with some innovation stuff? And what kind of characteristics spring to mind for you?
The first thing that came to mind was they're willing to speak. They're willing to come to you and say things, but not just complaining, for example. Start with, this thing doesn't work. But they usually come with a very constructive view of how things could be better. Even if it's not a solution, it might be just a well-articulated problem. At WorkSafe, every project had what we call design crew. There were people that would join us from the business. And that was the same thing. It wasn't as distributed as Kmart and Target with 45,000 people around the country, but those people had a very keen interest on doing something different and connecting with the innovation practitioners that have the tools, the methods. It gets a really good combination. And that's what we try to do is you come with the expertise, you come with the knowledge, and we'll help you with the methods and we'll help you to get it done.
Yeah, so you're almost like a support function in a way, because you're seeing, in a sense, what they're hoping to solve, and you're able to reframe that and then obviously provide the systems, tools, people, processes, whatever it is, to help them move that thing along from here to here and obviously come up with a tangible result, which is great. There's also the other part around probably influence more broadly, but it's around what people do with information around innovation projects and how they absorb the information, what you're expecting them to pass on. There's kind of ownership of the initiative, which is one thing, but then there's the pool of influence that you can create to get a lot of more significant programs underway. So have you worked in some of those scenarios?
Yeah, and this is critical. I think this is the change management part, the beginning of it, where you need to get the people that are going to be running those products, those transformation initiatives when they become part of core business. And you want to get them at the beginning of the journey. At Kmart, we have an innovation stores that we actually live there. My team doesn't even have desks in head office. We work from a store, from this innovation store. If they are not on board, then it's really hard. And then you go to the next group of stores for that initiative, for trialing, and it's the same logic. So getting them on board is critical. There's no way you can do anything without starting with that piece of change management.
I don't know if you know the model, but I was looking back at a Dr. Tim Baker framework earlier on. Do you know that one? Where you've basically got different strategies for influence, and it's around push and pull and then logic to emotion, and there are different quadrants. And one of them's got your investigator, where it's basically you're asking a lot of questions. There's another one where you're about a motivator. Then you're a calculator or a collaborator. There are different ways to gather up influence and to work with people to create collective influence, do you think?
Oh, yeah. And you're only going to realize what are the buttons you need to push if you involve them from the beginning. The population of store managers is very diverse, but there is some commonalities in objectives and these metrics that they have to achieve, and that drives certain behaviors. So if you don't understand that, then it's really hard for you to make an impact. I think it's part of that empathy that you have to have at the beginning when you start the design process.
Yeah. And how do you find out about people and their relative strengths and working preferences in a way that works, do you think?
We don't have any specific methods at the moment, although I think we have a really good understanding of the different profiles of store managers, let's say, that we work with, and the time that they've been in the business, what's their background. When we were at WorkSafe, which is more like a corporate setting, we would do a lot of personality tests for the teams that would come together, including the design crew, because we wanted to understand who we're working with. And that was a really good way to just accelerate collaboration without bumping on each other. There's so many personality tests, but it was just a good way to level everyone and say, this is what we do. But at Kmart, we just try to get to know the individual and what they do and what their preference is.
Personality tests are interesting. What do you think they tell you over and above what you think you believe?
I think for us was really an interesting way to understand how the person that you're working with prefer to work. So it was more like a work kind of assessment. So some people, that's obvious. But when you put everyone on a matrix, and those are the people that prefer to work on their own most of the time. Those are the people that actually require heavy collaboration. How do we have a team that has a lot of people that want to work by themselves, let's say? So how do we balance that a little bit? We continue to collaborate. So it was just a way to navigate the teamwork, basically.
Yeah, and those moments around collaboration, do you think there are lots of different ways to do it, but what do you see working well and maybe less well?
I think innovation doesn't happen without heavy collaboration. So if you're someone that don't like to work with other people and in a sometimes uncomfortable way, because it means that people are going to disagree with you. You're going to go through some really tricky moments that you have to endure together. Then innovation is not for you. So that's the starting point. The second part is knowing that I think the process, although there's a lot of collaboration, is not only collaboration. We encourage people to spend a lot of time together in the store, but we also encourage people to spend time on their own, producing, creating, and designing whatever form design happens, software or graphic design or whatever, and then coming together, having a solid critique of the work, and then coming back and working on their own again. So it ebb and flow on collaboration and individuality. But when you're together, it's really intense.
Yeah, everyone brings a certain color or flavor to the work, obviously. And diversity of perspective is obviously incredibly important within the innovation landscape. And there's also another debate around generalists and specialists and where people sit and where people prefer to lean. If you're thinking about Double Diamond or any of the processes, there are fewer people that basically go across the end to end, or maybe there are some that sit in certain parts of that and feel very comfortable, obviously. But do you find that there's a mix in terms of specialist or generalist at any of those stages that seems to work well? And do you think you need to be involved from the start to be able to output something that's brilliant at the end?
We have a few people that can actually do the entire diamond.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that actually stay from beginning to end, because they tend to be more generalists and be able to navigate the ambiguity of the beginning, but also the crush that you have at the end to deliver something. We don't try to get, because of that diversity of thought, we want to get people that have different types of mindsets. I love the people that are specialists. I love the people that are like, I'm a UX UI designer. I love innovation, but my thing is the second diamond. That's amazing. But at the same time, without someone that can take you through the whole thing and have that elevated picture of the challenge, how we actually hitting the marks, it's hard. I'll say that those two different profiles of working innovation. You can be an expert that is in one area, but it's very hard to find a generalist, I find.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a need for that, but it's not always something that anyone who's trying to fill a role will put their finger on necessarily, because usually there's a gap that somebody needs to fill. I was just thinking about the projects that you're working on and what other formulas work well. Research comes up as well. There's a lot to do with design research, and I guess across the end-to-end, actually. It's really interesting to see that there are a lot of shortcuts popping up through AI and other areas. Have you found anything there that is looking worrying for you?
No, I don't think so. I think that shortcuts have been around forever for the use of technology, or just people trying to save time on one less interview or different methods. I think methods are a really interesting way to try and get a shortcut in a research project, for example. I'm a big believer on just enough research philosophy, which is basically do just enough so you can progress to your next learning goal. A lot of the especially in government, that happened a lot. There was an overuse of research without a solid outcome. And that's so dangerous, because you open up the divergent phase of your project so much that it's hard to pull back. We operate on this just enough research philosophy and just try to leverage the technology to help.
How do you go about scoping that? I know I've done research myself. It feels you can sometimes have more questions, or the expectation is, again, like we're going to have to solve for the whole thing at once. So we've got 150 questions. We're going to have to prioritize those in some way. What are you finding is the way to get to the just enough version of what you want to do?
For us, it's shaping the brief, the initial brief, really well, which is a constant challenge. We are not there yet. I don't think we'll ever be going to be able to say we have the perfect shaping process. But the more you shape, the easier it is. Go out and talk to the right people, narrow on the right problem space, because you might not know exactly the problem, and choose the right methods as well. And it's normal sometimes that if you don't have the shaping, you basically have a 3-4 diamond, but it's a lot of the first diamond repeating, so you can actually narrow down on something. But we have now a deliberate practice to shape projects before we hand them over to the teams that are going to be working on.
That sounds really good. Let's talk a bit about results. How do you think it's going, and what have you been able to achieve through some of the things that you've been describing so far?
I think we've been really lucky with the group of people that accepted to join this journey at Kmart. So we have a really amazing group of people, a mix of designers, developers, and a lot of former store people that joined the team. And we were able to do some really cool things. But I think the most important thing for me is creating this repeatable innovation process that we can get whatever challenge that is thrown at us, and we can come out with something that is meaningful for the business. Some things are pretty quick. Some others will take a long time. But we've been really lucky to have a group of people that believe in that journey. We started this a couple of years ago, and now I think that everyone is very confident that we can deliver. We have done some really interesting work in RFID extension to all the products outside of apparel, the deployment of those robots in store, a lot of things related to profit protection that it's a very interesting scenario that I have never worked in before. So yeah, it's been an amazing journey and very happy.
Profit protection sounds good. Can you explain what that's about a little bit?
Profit protection, loss prevention, it's like a retail term for avoiding theft, as I think many retailers are experiencing now. It's going through the roof, and we are trying to solve that problem.
There's lots of really good stuff in that, I think, in terms of progress. And there are many things, it feels hard to quantify almost. Like, how do you decide on how much to do and what to do? And how does that initiation of where to focus tend to start?
It starts with the strategic programs that we have in the business. So we have a couple of key strategic programs that we attach to, not all of them. Those programs will have a roadmap, and we usually pick parts of the roadmap that are unknown or they're brand new areas that the program wants to work. So for example, if we're thinking about digitizing tasks in stores, there is a program happening digitizing certain tasks, but if you say we need to digitize replenishment, we don't know how to do it, my team will come in and do it. So that's the first thing, connection to strategy. The second one is we have a limited capacity because we have a limited number of people and limited budget. So what we do is that we divide our working cycles, 6-week cycles, and then 2 weeks of in-between cycles to wrap up documentation, showcase, and decide on the next cycle. And in those cycles, each project can only have 2, maximum 3 people. So that basically creates our capacity. Sometimes we have projects that we call off cycle that, for example, if we're going to trial something requires more than 6 weeks, we take people out of the cycle. So that limits the capacity. So we follow the shape up methodology from Basecamp. That is a light agile, let's call it. I don't know if that's the right way to describe it. But we come to a betting table with some key stakeholders that say, this is the stuff that we want to work on this cycle, usually more than the capacity. So we have some sort of friction, and then the best ideas survive.
Yeah, it sounds pretty well organized. Often there's a design ops angle to it, but for innovation, is it falling in line with that, or is it something that you have to set up separately as an operational system?
It's another just enough philosophy we use, is just enough governance. So we try to be very light on governance because we believe that the more governance, the less innovation you have. There's definitely a minimum level that you need to have, so you don't go to the no-go zones that we usually say, privacy, cybersecurity, procurement. We respect all those rules, but everything else was kind of up for grabs for us to try and work a little bit faster. So we try to be as light on governance as possible and push a lot of autonomy to the teams. They can make any decision they want. They have a pre-approved budget that is quite small, but they can use that in whatever way they feel they need, buying equipment, rostering people to perform tasks. We only want to see at the end of 6 weeks that they have got it to the point that they need. And the managers are doing what we call in-cycle shaping. So if there's something else that can deliver or something less, like maybe we didn't shape right, we need to reduce the scope. So that happens in real time. But that's it. We don't do a lot more than that.
Okay, cool. That sounds really good. It's contained but open. It's obviously time boxed. So there's some degree of risk mitigation, I guess, for the fact that it's not huge. It's not like we're signing off 6 or 9 months or 12 months worth of work here. But that's cool. And then the expectation from it through that 6 weeks, how do some of the rituals play out?
Yeah, it depends on, we have 2 types of cycle. One cycle called solve cycle, which is from problem definition to problem solution fit. That means in design language, you go all the way to low fidelity prototypes. So you have 6 weeks to find out what the problem is and generate a few solutions that you think will solve that. If you're successful, you move to a build cycle. And the build cycle is just building fidelity. So you pick one of those prototypes, or maybe a couple together, and you then build fidelity to the point that at least one store can see the benefit. Like we have to see on the dashboard, like the metrics change. With the caveat here that depending on the complexity of the solution, you might need multiple build cycles. Yeah. Because might build a feature here, then another feature. What is important is that every 6 weeks, we stop and decide if that project is still worth the risk. As you said, like we only have an appetite for 6 weeks. Then we have to check. And if a project doesn't finish in time, it doesn't get an extension. We have to see what happened. Is that a product issue or a shaping issue? It might get an extension, but it might not get an extension. And that helps keep the momentum going. And then the rituals will follow whatever cycle you're on. So if you have a lot of research happening, you're going to have your cycle. It's all about downloads and synthesis. But in build, it's all about fidelity. Are you getting the numbers? Kind of more like a daily. thing.
What are some of the experiments in terms of how you experiment? Is it mostly leaned on digital? Is there a lot of everything else that's thrown into the mix as well? In store, how physical does it get? I guess some of those questions around how to decide on the validity of the test through the way in which you're doing it.
It gets very physical. I think we operate on that combination of physical and digital because anything that we do has to be executed in stores.
Yeah.
So either from a customer point of view or a team member point of view. So an example, we have been testing different ways to use the RFID technology. And one of the things we're testing at the moment is, can we have RFID in fitting rooms so that customers come in and they see what they're bringing, and you can build a lot of use cases on that, especially for profit protection is another way to help clarify what customers are doing and potentially not doing. So we actually got readers, RFID readers, and we hacked a setup that was huge. We had a monitor, a laptop, all inside a plastic box in a fitting room, and we were testing it ourselves. When we saw the technology was working, we invited customers in, and that's how I go. And now we're building the fidelity up and the hardware down, like reducing the size of hardware. So that's the part that is really rewarding to be in retail because it will get you make things physical and test tomorrow. It's really cool.
Yeah, that's incredible. Very responsive way of doing it, obviously, and you can just jump into a store and do something one day. Are you finding that all those stores are quite, I guess, cooperative when it comes to that sort of thing, or have you got? I'm sure there are people that are right for certain experiments, but maybe not others.
Yeah, I think it depends on the experiment. I think anything that has to do with technology, I would say most stores are very open. If it's more process, because we do a lot of process innovation as well, it then depends on how the store is tracking at the moment. Some stores get really busy at certain times of the year, and then you probably don't want to get close to those stores because, it's not fair to them. But overall, there is an appetite for innovation, especially when it's not top down. When you come and say, hey, we don't know exactly what are we going to do, but we want to solve this problem. Can you help me in this journey? And we have never heard, there might be some resistance down the track, but they're usually happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me a bit of the innovation work I was doing in London, and almost the project itself is basically the start of a kind of community building exercise in one way or another. So you're thinking about employee experience and a bit about building culture, and the fact that you're solving for customer problems together, bringing people together from different teams. And obviously in a retail environment, you've got people that are on the floor and seeing customers all the time. And I think that mix of energy and input and insight that kind of comes about that is just really rare. When it works well, it works really well. And you can obviously get a lot from it. It feels like that's a kind of cultural experience for a lot of people that work there, that they get to work on the innovation with you. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is the nature of retail, that people are so focused on the customer, and if you're solving a problem that is impacting that, definitely they want to help. There is also, I think, a very entrepreneurial mindset that came out. We recently started working with Target as well, but I can definitely say from Cayman, where I spend most of my time, that people want to do new stuff, and you just have to use that energy like in your favor, because people are actually willing to help and propose and criticize and build together.
Yeah, nice. I mean, that sounds really good. Are there any other big sort of cultural initiatives that you think bring innovation together or make it more easy?
I'm a bit against those big scale training. I just think that it takes a lot of time and you don't get a lot out of it. I prefer to work with design crew, 1-2 people that are actually going to go and disseminate the thinking. We did something really interesting at Workstate. Instead of training people on methods, we started to get people together on what we call F Up Nights from startup. Someone from the team said, let's do a Stuff Up lunch internal. And it blew up. We're getting more than 100 people per lunch to hear stories of people stuffing up. And what we did, we started bringing in the senior executives. So we got the CEO to come in and talk. Pretty much the entire C-level came in and told stories about when they stuffed up and what happened, because we wanted to get people more, not to glorify failure, because no one likes to fail, but just to glorify trying, and that you can survive on the other end if you're responsible and you're doing the right things with a good intent. Everyone will make mistakes. And I think that was probably the highlight I have seen to generate this momentum for, I wouldn't say innovation, but more like the appetite and courage.
I saw this in a talk the other day, but it was the moment at which SpaceX had basically launched a rocket into space and it blew up. and there was a cut. The camera just pans across to the SpaceX HQ is what it was. Everyone's just like cheering and like the crowd's going wild as if the best thing had happened. They were able to learn from something, and they were all just really happy about that. So I think failure, if framed in the right way, and obviously through experimentation, it can be incredibly valuable. Can bring a sort of sense of progress in a funny sort of way as well.
Yeah. I think the reality is the journey of innovation is 5% failure, but small failures. You don't want to get to a big failure. What I always like to say is follow the process, follow the methods, and then you're not going to fail in your project. You're going to fail throughout your project, but you don't want to get to the end with something, as we discussed in the beginning, an idea that you had that you thought was better than anything else. That is a huge failure. Small, constant failure in the beginning, that's part of what it is. But if you're not used to it and you feel that someone's going to judge you or it's going to hurt your career, you don't move past step 1. You need to get to step 100.
Yeah, that's really good advice, I think, in terms of it's not all success and it's not all failure, but there might be smaller versions of each of those that happen that you can make more manageable in a way, which is great to hear. Was there if you think back to your career so far, is there a big learning or something that characterizes your approach that springs to mind?
Having worked with stores and has been a very interesting way of looking on how you can influence people. I think my approach that I have today of being that extreme empathy, you've got to be embedded in the store. And when we work, all the businesses have got to be embedded in the problem that you actually solving. And the more you can do it, the better. It's because of the experience that I had back in 2013 when we decided that we're going to do innovation inside. It was the Altona store, which is a suburb here in Melbourne. And it was really hard because I was basically new to Australia, new to the business. You didn't understand anything. And I had to go through a change management approach, or say a culture change approach, before anything landed. And that just made me appreciate sometimes the product can be the best. If you don't truly understand people, it's not going to land. And I think that impacted a lot of how I approach things. Sometimes can be seen a bit inefficient, that you spend too much time with people trying to understand them, making them understand you. Only then you go and start delivering what you are there to deliver. And yeah, that has been a very interesting experience that I'll never forget. And it became like a secret sauce of what we do.
Yeah. There's that other triangle that says tell, ask, listen. Where do you find you spend most of the time on that triangle in the way that you work?
We like to spend a lot of time on observing and doing. We call ask, observe, do.
Yeah.
The beauty of retail, we can actually do the work. In government, when we're looking at injured workers, for example, you could sometimes observe parts of a recovery, but mostly was ask. You couldn't observe or do. And now we can truly get the triangle. And the truth is in the middle. That's what I always say. The truth is in the middle. If you tick the 3 things, the truth is in the middle. And so we'll probably spend too much time asking and observing, but we should spend more observing and doing.
There's a lot of thought, obviously, around lean and how to get things out into market quickly. And I think the do is obviously that's what people want to see for it to be believable in a way. You've got to report back on something. But that's really, that's an interesting way to look at it on a different triangle to what I was describing. Yeah, let's talk about innovation again. Now, what's one big mistake that you see happening all the time?
I'll say, I'll probably go back to my first answer, is doing projects that might look easy or might look sexy or flashy. It's just a use of technology, but they don't actually solve a real problem that the business has over and over and over again. If there was one thing that I would say to people working in innovation is please find a real problem, immerse yourself, choose the hard, not the shortcut, the long cut. Usually at the end, you get that reaction like, what is this innovation? That's not what I expected to happen.
Yeah, that's it. Hey, maybe we can just finish on a bit of a walkthrough of how you've ended up doing what you do and, what some of the kind of key moments in your career have been in getting into innovation, but also evolving your practice. So for anyone out there who feels creative in some way, I'm sure, but feels frustrated perhaps and wants to move into the field of innovation, it's obviously an incredibly interesting field. But what are some of the things to be aware of as options as you go through your career, do you think?
A multidisciplinary background, I think, helps a lot, being able to do a lot of different things, because at the end of the day, you need to connect dots, and to connect dots, you need to have a lot of dots. So exposing yourself to multiple realities is one thing that I highly recommend. And it's one of the things that we try to have as a hiring, I would say filter, but one of the hiring criteria is the diversity of background that someone might have. My background was, until I had my first role in innovation, which was in Australia back in 2013, it was a mix of a lot of things that had an underlying tone of innovation called new products, new business, strategic projects, but I would never call it innovation. And I remember when I started applying for jobs when I moved to Australia, no one, like, your background is not, you don't have enough time in banking, have a little bit. Not enough time in pharmaceutical, just a little bit. Not enough time in consulting, just a little bit. So I heard that over and over again. But when I came to and was able to convince them that it was a good option for that role, it was basically because I could see problems in a way that other people couldn't see. And my recommendation is, if you have this diverse background, don't hide it. A lot of the advice that you get is like, oh, focus on this thing. But if you're looking for a job in innovation, highlight the fact that you have that dot forest and you can connect those dots. There's nothing that can replace that.
Yeah, wonderful advice. There's so much kind of niching going on, it feels like, within resumes. And I'm sure you see them all the time, portfolios. And actually, there's a lot of second guessing involved in people saying, I think they're going to be hiring on this. And obviously, the job description, it might give some clues to how to set that up. But often it's maybe not showing you enough about the candidate that you're looking at. Right?
Yeah. And I think be willing to, for the people that are hiring, setting up innovation teams, be willing to have a go at people that have those backgrounds that don't actually fit the mold. In both in WorkSafe, Kmart, we really truly try to get people that are very different from each other. We try not to have a culture like that. You have to be part of this cult. It is a different group of people that is harder to manage because people don't behave in that way. But that's what you need. It's different from hiring people for a product team or finance team, that you want them to be similar in that sense. We want people to be different, and it's just a different practice.
Yeah, nice. What else? Any other resources that you think people should be looking at to think about innovation today, or anything that you find useful?
A couple of things that I would highly recommend. Design-led innovation is the Bible that I follow. There's a couple of books that I would recommend. I think the first one, for people that are trying to introduce design-led change to any big organization, is called The Design Full Company from Martin Neumeier. It's a notebook, but some old examples there, but definitely worth it. And another one that's quite obscure, people don't talk a lot about, it's called Naked Innovation. It's actually free, so go to the website and you can download it for free. I'll say those are the two starting points to understand this revolution of design-led innovation. Very important to read a lot as well on those methods, but those would be the two starting points for me.
Yeah, nice. And what excites you about innovation, or what excites you about work more generally if you're looking ahead?
I think we're at the point of convergence of multiple technologies that 10 years ago were a dream. And it's really cool to be part of this moment and able to finally deploy those technologies at a cost that is reasonable, so you can understand and you can deliver things. So I'm really excited by the future and what we're going to be able to do.
Let's finish with one more question just around your superpower. If I could ask you what you think your superpower is, that'd be interesting.
I'll probably say that's what people usually say. I'm very good at looking at an idea or a project and translating that into a spreadsheet. And I'm not a finance person, but I can see that into how that plays out in a P&L or a business. So that's my superpower that is a bit random.
When did you start doing that?
I think it was when I was working in pharmaceutical business. We did a lot of innovation, was new product, but everything had to be translated into a spreadsheet. So I think my brain changed into how to see opportunities is how much does it cost, how much the value of it.
Are there a few Fabio dashboarding templates that you've used or that you use?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. That's a good one. All right. Thanks so much, Fabio. I really loved having you on the show and asking about your question, asking about all these things to do with innovation at Kmart and obviously from your past experiences as well. And it's just been super interesting. I love the conversation that we've been able to have. So yeah, thank you again for coming onto the show.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to have a chat. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Not a problem. We'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Fabio. Okay, so that's it for this episode. If you're hearing this message, you've listened all the way to the end. So thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'd love to hear your feedback, so please leave us a review and share this episode with your friends, team members, leaders, if you think it'll make a difference. After all, we're trying to help you, the entrepreneurs, kick more goals within your organizations. If you have any questions about the things we covered in the show, please email me directly at chris@companyroad.co. I answer all messages, so please don't hesitate to reach out. And to hear about the latest episodes and updates, please head to companyroad.co to subscribe. Tune in next Wednesday for another new episode.